Stop trying to make people understand you, to justify every decision, every silence, every step you took with your heart in your hand. You get tired of trying to convince those who don't want to listen, of proving your worth to eyes that already decided not to see it. And that exhaustion is not weakness, it's the first sign of freedom. Because there comes a point when you finally understand that life is not about being understood, but about being consistent with yourself. And once you understand that, everything changes. Maybe you're listening to this today because you feel drained, because you spent years giving explanations to people who didn't deserve them, apologizing for being who you are, begging for understanding in relationships where empathy was nowhere to be found. You've lived trying to make your words fix misunderstandings, your intentions be seen with kindness, your decisions be accepted. But the more you explain, the more you feel like you're losing something of yourself, and that something is your power. The constant need to explain yourself is one of the subtlest forms of emotional slavery. It's an invisible rope that ties you to other people's approval. You start wanting to be understood, but you end up living to convince. And the worst part is that in the process, you fade. You stop acting out of conviction and start acting out of defense. You justify yourself before being accused, apologize for existing, and turn your authenticity into an argument. It's a silent form of self-abandonment. What if I told you that stopping your explanations doesn't make you cold, but free? That indifference, properly understood, isn't apathy, it's mastery. That silence, at the right time, can be more powerful than 1,000 speeches. I know in a society that teaches us to please, talking about indifference sounds rebellious. But maybe it's the only healthy rebellion left. Because stopping your explanations doesn't mean closing your heart. It means no longer giving it to those who don't know how to hold it. The human mind has a deep need for validation. From childhood, we learn to seek approval from others to feel safe. But there comes a stage of emotional maturity one few ever reach, where you discover that true peace doesn't come from being understood, but from understanding yourself. That's where real self-mastery begins. Think about it. How many times have you apologized for something you didn't truly regret? How many times have you explained your absence, your silence, or your change, just so you wouldn't seem distant or ungrateful? And how many times did you feel that, after doing so, you hadn't gained understanding, only emptiness? That happens because explanations can't heal what someone refuses to understand. All they do is drain you, while the other person remains unchanged. When you stop explaining yourself, something inside you rearranges. You discover a different kind of stillness, the stillness of a soul that no longer needs to defend itself. You begin to speak less and observe more, to respond only when it matters, and to remain silent when you know your words would be wasted. That transformation doesn't happen overnight, it's a process. But once you go through it, there's no going back. And no, it's not pride, it's not ego, it's wisdom. It's the deep understanding that your energy is limited and that you cannot waste it justifying what you do right. It's recognizing that the world doesn't need to understand your path for it to be valid. The wise act with coherence, not with permission. They know that truth, sooner or later, defends itself. The greatest paradox is that when you stop explaining yourself, people start listening more. Because your silence is no longer empty, it's presence. Because your actions, unadorned, have a weight that words will never carry. Calm becomes your message, serenity your language. And those who once demanded reasons are left facing the truth. They refuse to see that they never needed to understand you, they needed to respect you. This is not a call to emotional detachment, but to spiritual clarity. To understand that control over your life begins when you stop justifying your choices. From today on, you don't need to convince anyone to live in peace. You don't need to explain why you distanced yourself, why you changed, or why you choose silence. You don't need to explain your growth. What is done from virtue sustains itself. So this session is not about learning to respond better, but about learning when to remain silent. Not to speak louder, but to speak only when reason calls for it. Not for others to understand you, but for you to stop, depending on their understanding. Because in the end, freedom begins there. In the moment, you no longer feel the need to justify your existence. In the instant, you discover that not convincing is also a form of self-love. In the precise second, you understand that not responding isn't surrender, it's choosing peace over noise. Today, you'll learn that there's no better revenge than a peaceful life, no better response than calm. That silence, when it comes from inner certainty, can be more powerful than any word. And that the one who hurt you, doubted you, or demanded explanations will eventually understand what they lost. But when they do, you won't be waiting for them to understand, you'll be living in peace. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by writing in the comments. Starting today, I stop justifying myself. That phrase will remind you that you don't need to explain who you are to have value. You are here to reclaim your inner freedom, to stop asking permission to be yourself. This is your moment to stop living, to convince and start living with coherence. Without further ado, let's begin. First Stoic lesson. The fear of not being understood is a mental prison. All of us, at some point, have been prisoners of the need to be understood. There are no visible bars, no guards watching over us, but there is something far crueler. The constant anxiety of having to explain who you are, to clarify your intentions, to correct others' perceptions. It is a prison built from words that are never enough, and every attempt to justify yourself becomes another shackle tying you to the approval of others. You've felt that way, haven't you? That sensation of speaking and feeling your words bounce against an invisible wall, of showing your heart and being met with indifference, of trying to be clear, fair, authentic, and still being misunderstood. It's a silent frustration, a tiredness that builds up in your chest. And there comes a point when you no longer speak to express yourself, you speak to defend yourself. But the soul was not made to live defensively. Epictetus taught that a human being can only lose their freedom when they surrender their inner judgment. And the fear of not being understood is precisely that, handing over your judgment to someone else's opinion. When you become obsessed with being understood, you stop understanding yourself. When you adjust your message to be accepted, you betray the clarity of your voice, and little by little, you begin to fade. You no longer speak with authenticity, you speak with caution. You no longer say what you think you say, what you believe will be better received. It's an exhaustion that weighs on both body and mind. Think of the last time you tried to explain your behavior. Maybe you did it with good intentions to avoid conflict, to be understood, to protect a relationship. But when the explanation is repeated over and over with no result, it becomes a form of submission. What began as empathy turns into fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone, fear of being judged. And that fear, small as it may seem, is a shadow that seeps into every decision. Stoicism doesn't teach coldness, it teaches clarity. It doesn't tell you to stop feeling, it teaches you to discern what deserves your emotional energy and what does not. The wise do not seek to be understood by everyone because they know that most people do not listen to understand, they listen to reply. That is why the Stoic speaks little but acts with precision. Their coherence becomes their language. And even if not everyone understands them, those who observe them feel the strength of their serenity. Those who live seeking to be understood become slaves to context. Each time their surroundings change, their discourse changes. Today they appear strong because someone admires them. Tomorrow they appear weak because someone criticizes them. They live adapting their essence to the emotional climate of others. But those who live from reason, from their inner center, do not depend on acceptance to feel at peace. Because true peace does not come from being understood, it comes from living according to what one believes is right. Seneca summarized it in one immortal line: "Peace does not lie in being loved by everyone, but in not needing to be." And that, simple as it sounds, holds one of the greatest revolutions of the soul. Freeing yourself from the fear of not being understood is returning to yourself. It's no longer wasting energy explaining what's evident. It's learning to stay silent when the other person isn't ready to listen. It's choosing serenity over persuasion. Maybe a part of you resists this idea. Maybe you think, if I don't explain myself, they'll misunderstand me. And yes, they might. But what weighs more, the misunderstanding of others or your inner peace? When someone decides not to understand you, nothing you say will change that. And when someone truly values you, they don't need explanations to understand your actions. That is the difference between wasting energy and cultivating calm. Imagine that. Every time you rush to justify yourself, a small flame within you dims. At first, you don't notice it, but over the years, you feel your fire weakening. You no longer speak with conviction, you speak with fear. You no longer choose your words, you measure them. You no longer express your truth, you edit it. The fear of not being understood becomes a constant filter between you and the world. But that filter, sooner or later, ends up separating you from yourself. And how do you break that pattern? Stoicism offers a practical path, remembering what depends on you and what does not. It depends on you to act with virtue, with justice, with temperance, with courage. It does not depend on you whether others recognize those virtues. It depends on you to be clear in your actions. It does not depend on you whether others interpret them correctly. It depends on you to be honest with your conscience. It does not depend on you whether the world approves. Once you understand this, the weight disappears. The need to explain yourself dissolves. And in its place appears something far more powerful, the serenity of one who knows who they are. From that moment on, your communication changes. Your tone becomes calmer, your words fewer, your gaze steadier. You no longer speak to convince, you speak to express. You no longer fear silence, you value it. Because you understand that silence, when born from inner certainty, is not emptiness, it is presence. And so, slowly, you recover what you had lost, your inner freedom. The freedom to be without justifying yourself, to act without fear of misunderstanding, to move forward without carrying the burden of others' judgment. Remember this every time you feel the urge to explain who you are. The soul does not need permission to exist. And those who live with coherence, even if they are not understood, are always respected by life itself. Second Stoic lesson. You should not explain yourself to those who do not wish to understand. There are conversations that do not seek to understand you. They only seek to drain you. There are ears that do not listen. They only wait for their turn to respond. And there are people who are not confused, but comfortable in their lack of understanding. Because understanding you would mean questioning their worldview, admitting they may have judged you unfairly, accepting they were not as righteous as they believed. That is why they do not want to understand you. Not because they can't, but because doing so would hurt. And you, without realizing it, have spent energy trying to open doors that the other person has already decided to keep closed. That is one of the most subtle forms of emotional slavery. trying to explain what is evident to someone who has no interest in seeing it. The noble soul insists, strives, and exhausts itself trying to show its truth. But the Stoic learns with time that clarity does not depend on the volume of your words, but on the listener's willingness to hear. If there is no openness, there is no dialogue, only noise, only exhaustion. You've been there, you know it. Explaining yourself over and over, repeating the same thing with different words, hoping to finally be understood. And all you end up with is feeling lonelier, more frustrated, more tired. By the end of the conversation, not only were you not understood, but you were also blamed for being exaggerated, intense, dramatic. And you sit there in silence, staring into the void, wondering how your good intentions always end up turning into misunderstandings. The answer is simple and painful. Not everyone seeks the truth. Some only seek to be right. And when you speak to someone like that, no explanation will ever be enough. You can strip yourself of pride, show your wounds, lay your soul on the table, and still, they won't see it. Because they are not looking. They are defending their version, their ego, their fixed idea. And no argument can penetrate the wall of pride. Epictetus knew this. In his teaching, he insisted on a crucial distinction. Never lose your peace trying to correct another's judgment. Every person sees the world through the mirror of their own mind, and if that mirror is dirty, it will reflect distortions even if you stand before it with the purest of intentions. You cannot clean someone else's mirror. You can only keep yours clear. That is why the wise do not exhaust themselves explaining. They speak to those who wish to learn, and stay silent before those who wish to argue, because they understand that a dialogue without openness is not communication, it is combat. And the soul does not need to fight to defend what is already true. When you understand this, something changes within you. You begin to recognize the signs, the eyes that don't listen, the tone that interrupts, the smile that hides contempt, and you no longer enter those places. Not because you feel superior, but because you understand that silence can be a form of respect, respect for yourself, for your energy, for your peace. Seneca said that there is no greater wisdom than choosing the battles worthy of your soul. Explaining yourself to someone who refuses to understand you is fighting in a battlefield where only time is lost. It is trying to convince the wind to change direction, and while you try to be understood, the other enjoys your effort. Because those who don't wish to understand feed off your insistence. They watch you justify yourself, watch you doubt, watch you lower your tone, watch you apologize for things you never should. That is the real trap. The more you explain, the more power you give away. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Preserving your energy is preserving your dignity. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the most elegant victory. Because when you don't respond, the other is left alone with their noise. And nothing unsettles the ego more than the echo of its own voice. Imagine that your life is a garden. Your words are seeds. Every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't want to understand, you throw those seeds onto stone. None of them take root, none bloom. But your soul feels the emptiness of having lost them. On the other hand, when you choose wisely where to speak, your words fall on fertile ground. You don't need to say much. A single phrase, spoken with coherence, grows more than 1,000 justifications spoken from fear. Remember this: you are under no obligation to be understood by everyone. Your duty is to live in such a way that, even if no one notices, you know you have acted according to reason. That is true peace, to look back and know you did not lie, manipulate, or betray your truth for the sake of approval. If the other doesn't see it, that's not your problem. Your integrity doesn't depend on their understanding. It depends on your coherence. The next time you feel the urge to explain, stop, breathe. Ask yourself, am I speaking to be understood or to be validated? If it's the first, speak with serenity. If it's the second, stay silent. Because what seeks validation will never bring peace. Indifference toward misunderstanding is not coldness, it's maturity. It's knowing that not every truth can be shared and not every heart is ready to listen. Some will understand your silence more than your words, and that is enough. In time, you'll see that those who truly wish to understand you will do so without demanding explanations. They will observe you, listen to you, feel you, and without words, they will understand. The rest, let them keep talking. Your calm is your most convincing argument, your life, your greatest declaration. This is how the wise act. They speak when the other's soul is open. They stay silent when it is closed, and in both cases, they preserve their peace. Because in the end, it's not about convincing. It's about living so aligned with your truth that the world has no choice but to see it, even if it never fully understands. Third Stoic lesson: the truth needs no defense. The truth does not shout. It does not chase after anyone to make them believe it. The truth simply remains, and in that silent remaining, it reveals its power. But we humans fear silence. We are unsettled by the calm of what does not explain itself. We are terrified that our integrity might go unrecognized, and so we rush to defend what is already evident. We try to justify what is just, to clarify what is clean, to protect what needs no protection. In that urgency to convince, we lose the very serenity that proves we were right all along. Think of the times you've had to defend yourself against something you knew was false. A rumor, an unfair accusation, a misunderstood glance. You feel the impulse to clarify, to prove, to keep talking, and without realizing it, that impulse turns into an emotional labyrinth. Because the more you defend yourself, the more it looks like you have something to hide. The more you speak, the more your truth gets lost in the noise. Purity is not proven, it is lived. Epictetus said, "He who is conscious of his rectitude needs no witnesses." That phrase contains a freedom few dare to sustain. Because living without defending yourself means trusting in time, in coherence, in the constancy of your actions. It means letting truth, not your words, do the speaking. And that requires an inner strength the ego cannot comprehend. The ego wants the last word. It wants to clean its image. It wants everyone to see it as just. But the Stoic soul seeks something greater. The serenity of one who knows he doesn't need to convince anyone in order to live in peace. Truth has its own rhythm and always finds its way to light. It may take time. It may be distorted. It may be denied for a while. But it needs no defenders, only patience. Because time is an unyielding judge, and it sets everything in its place. The one who lies will stumble over his own falsehood. The one who pretends will expose himself through his inconsistency. And the one who acts with virtue never needs to say, "I told you so." Life says it for him. But there is a deeper reason why we feel compelled to defend ourselves: fear of rejection. We don't defend the truth as much as we defend our image. It hurts when we're not seen as we believe we deserve to be seen. We want to clear our name, because deep down we fear not being accepted. And there, without noticing, we let vanity disguise itself as justice. We say we want to set things straight, when what we really want is admiration for being right. The wise detect that deception and cut it at the root, because they know that one who lives by coherence needs no approval, and one who acts from righteousness does not fear misunderstanding. Seneca wrote with clarity, "He who is angered by being judged unjustly still depends on others' judgment." That phrase stings because it forces us to look inward. Every time an injustice hurts you, ask yourself, does it hurt because it is false or because it wounds your pride? If the first, time will correct it. If the second, it is your ego speaking. And the ego, when wounded, drags your soul into useless battles. Here's an image that may help you. Imagine walking through a plaza and a child shouts something absurd about you. Do you stop to argue with him? Do you hand him your energy to convince him? No. You smile, keep walking, and the noise dissolves into the air. That's how the wise act. Not because they think themselves superior, but because they've learned to distinguish between what has weight and what does not. Not everything deserves a response. Not every provocation deserves your voice. The truth is like fire. While you feed it with explanations, it flickers. When you leave it alone, it burns on its own. A strong soul does not seek to cleanse its name, it seeks to cleanse its intention. And when the intention is pure, everything else falls into place. You may be misunderstood for a time, but you will never be defeated by falsehood. Because falsehood has a short life, and coherence is patient. He who acts rightly sleeps peacefully, and one who sleeps peacefully has already won. The Stoic understands that his task is not to control perceptions, but to control his actions. Virtue is his defense, and silence his shield. When the soul is aligned with reason, no word can stain it. So, when the world demands explanations, offer serenity. When they accuse you, offer calm. And when they try to provoke you, offer distance. Noise feeds on attention. Truth grows in silence. We live in an age where everyone has an opinion, but few truly understand. Where every gesture is analyzed, every sentence dissected, every intention misread. And in the midst of that noise, the Stoic chooses a different path. To act with rectitude and let time speak. That is the most powerful rebellion in a society addicted to justification to not react. To refuse the trap of explaining everything. To be a silent example of composure while everyone else shouts their truth to be seen. The day you manage to do this, you'll feel a profound change. Your body relaxes, your mind clears, your heart lightens. Because when you stop defending yourself, you stop living in a constant state of war. And when there is no war within you, nothing outside can truly harm you. So remember this. The truth needs no defense, not because it is arrogant, but because it is self-sufficient. Like light, it does not compete with darkness, it simply shines, and everything else dissolves. Do your part, maintain your coherence, and let time do the rest. That is not resignation, it is wisdom. And if you ever doubt, return to this image. A river does not argue with the stones, it flows around them, smooths them, passes through them. That is how truth behaves. It flows in silence, patient, steady, and before you know it, it has carved its own path. Fourth Stoic lesson. Silence is worth more than justification. There are silences that weigh you down, and silences that set you free. The first is born of fear, the second of understanding. The silence of the wise is not cowardice, it is power at rest. While the world shouts to be heard, he observes, breathes, and chooses not to join the noise. Not because he lacks arguments, but because he has already understood that the need to explain oneself is the most sophisticated form of insecurity. One who is at peace with their truth feels no urgency to defend it. We were taught that silence means consent, that if you don't defend yourself, you'll lose, that whoever stays quiet falls behind, but the Stoic sees the scene from another angle. He knows that sometimes those who speak the most are the ones who fear the most. And those who stay silent have simply freed themselves from the need to convince. Because over-explaining is begging for understanding, and forced understanding is never real. Think of the times when, after an argument, you were left with that bitter taste of having said too much, of trying to clarify so much that your words lost their weight, of falling into the game of someone who didn't want to understand you, but wanted to see you lose your composure. There, in that excess, you slowly wore yourself down. You explained, you defended, you insisted, and in the end, you realized the other person never wanted answers. They only wanted the last word. Silence, on the other hand, does not wear out. Silence prevails, not because it seeks to dominate, but because it cuts the conflict at its root. It is the invisible sword of the tempered soul. Seneca said, "The best revenge is not to resemble those who wronged you," and that includes not echoing their noise. When you choose silence in the face of provocation, you are not surrendering, you are rising above it. You step out of the mud without staining yourself. And though the other may think they have won, you know the deeper truth. Those who master their tongue master their destiny. There are silences that at first feel like defeat. Keeping quiet when you're hurt, falsely accused, or ignored feels unjust. The ego screams inside you, "Respond, tell them who you are, prove them wrong." But if you resist that urge, something different happens. The soul settles, the mind clears. And in that soundless space, you finally hear something you couldn't before, your own inner voice. Epictetus called it prohairesis, the mastery of judgment. Nothing external can disturb you unless you allow it. Silence then becomes an invisible wall. The insult bounces off, the provocation dissolves, the opinions of others fade, because silence needs no permission to be right. It doesn't respond, but it acts. It doesn't argue, but it transforms. It is the language of invisible strength. Most people mistake silence for passivity, but they are opposites. The silence of the wise is not that of one who surrenders, but of one who chooses when and how to respond. It is a strategic pause. It is mastery over impulse. It is consciousness measuring the moment and saying, "Not everything deserves a word." Because when you speak from emotion, you lose control. But when you stay silent from reason, the power returns to you. Imagine the calm of Marcus Aurelius before the senators who slandered him. He did not confront them. He did not deny them. His conduct was his argument. Every just decision, every sober word, every virtuous act was a silent rebuttal. And in time, the rumor faded before the evidence. That is how truth works. It does not need to shout, only to endure. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Not every attack requires a reply. The wise know when silence teaches more than speech." And he was right. Sometimes responding is lowering yourself. Sometimes explaining is losing authority. There are gazes unworthy of your energy. There are situations that can only be solved through distance. And there are people who only learn once. They can no longer provoke you. Silence is not about running away. It's about protecting what's sacred within you. Every word you speak is energy you give away. Every argument you enter is a place where you choose to plant your attention. The Stoic guards his attention as a warrior guards his sword, because he knows there is no greater battle than the one fought within. And if his mind is calm, no external word can harm him. When someone provokes you, remember this: fire needs air to grow. If you feed it with your words, it will burn until it consumes you. But if you deprive it of oxygen, it extinguishes itself. That's how anger, criticism, and manipulation work. Your silence is the wall that stops the fire. Your serenity is the water that puts it out. Yet, don't mistake silence for repression. It's not about keeping quiet out of fear, but out of wisdom. It's not about suppressing pain, but elevating it. There will be moments when speaking is necessary, and then your words will come with the right force, without anxiety, without excess, without violence. Because silence doesn't make you mute, it makes you conscious. And consciousness is what turns words into instruments of virtue. Stoicism teaches that every word must have purpose. If it doesn't educate, console, or build, it's unnecessary. Every needless explanation steals your presence. Every senseless argument steals your energy. Every justification born from fear steals your dignity. Silence, on the other hand, gives it all back. It gives you back your center. It gives you back your power. There is something profoundly beautiful in a soul that feels no need to justify itself. That person who remains calm while others shout, who observes while others react, who chooses peace over pride. That being, without uttering a word, teaches what 1,000 books could not explain. Because silence cannot be heard, but it can be felt. And when someone is at peace with themselves, their mere presence brings order to the world around them. So next time you feel the urge to defend yourself, to justify, to speak, to prove something, pause. Look at the sky. Breathe. Ask yourself whether your words will add value or merely keep alive a useless battle. If you discover that all you want is to be right, choose silence. Because silence needs no witnesses, only coherence. And remember, words can be weapons, but silence is a shield. Words wound, silence protects. Words wear out, silence strengthens. And in the end, when the storm passes, the silence of the wise remains intact. Serene, steady, unbreakable. Staying silent is not losing. To be silent, when done from virtue, is the highest form of mastery. Because those who master their tongue master their destiny, and those who master their destiny no longer need to justify anything. Fifth Stoic lesson. Do not lower yourself in an attempt to be understood. There is no greater betrayal of the soul than distorting yourself just to be accepted. And yet, we do it again and again. We soften our words to sound more agreeable. We shrink our ideas so they won't make others uncomfortable. We silence truths so we won't appear arrogant. And we end up becoming shadows of who we really are, hoping that this shadow will be loved more than our true self. It is a silent form of slavery, the desire to be understood at any cost. But here's what no one tells you while you're busy trying to make others understand you. You drift away from yourself. Every unnecessary explanation, every act of compliance, every word that dilutes your essence to fit in slowly erodes your character until one day you wake up empty, disconnected, lost. You've managed to be accepted, yes, but at the cost of disappearing. The wise do not seek understanding. They seek coherence. Because understanding is not the speaker's task, it belongs to the listener. Your duty is to express yourself clearly, act with virtue, and stay centered. What others do with that is no longer yours to control. And if the price of your coherence is not being understood, accept that cost with serenity. Marcus Aurelius wrote it with clarity. Do what is right, let others talk as they please. There is no deeper freedom than living without having to justify yourself for someone else's misunderstanding. Seneca knew this too. For years, he was accused of contradictions, of hypocrisy, of teaching virtue while serving power. But he did not spend his life clarifying rumors. His defense was his conduct, his work, his consistency. Because those who act with integrity never need to prove their purity. Coherence reveals itself over time. Noise fades. Virtue remains. The need to be understood is born from the fear of rejection, and fear of rejection grows from the ego's hunger for validation. You lower yourself not only when you yield to others, but also when you kneel before your own need to please. A strong soul is not defined by how many people understand it, but by how often it remains faithful to its principles, even when no one stands beside it. That fidelity is true courage. Think of how many times you felt that sting explaining yourself to someone who wasn't listening, justifying your decisions to someone who had already judged you, trying to translate your depth into a shallow language. Was it worth it? Every time you explained yourself more than necessary, your peace diminished. Every time you tried to please, your power dissolved. And every time you sought understanding where there was no genuine interest, your soul grew a little more tired. Stoicism teaches you to accept misunderstanding without losing balance, to recognize that not everyone has the capacity or the willingness to see you clearly. And that's okay. Not everyone is at the same point on the path. Some will interpret your calm as coldness, your silence as weakness, your firmness as arrogance, and you don't need to correct them. Let them see what they can see, what they cannot understand. Time will reveal. When you lower yourself to be understood, you confuse empathy with the sacrifice of identity. Empathy is building a bridge. Lowering yourself is tearing down your temple so that others feel comfortable. And if every time someone doesn't understand you, you lower your walls, soon you'll have nothing left. The soul needs boundaries to preserve its form. True understanding happens between equals in integrity, not between one who diminishes and one who demands understanding without reciprocity. Epictetus would say, "Do not seek to please everyone, but to please yourself." And he does not mean selfishness, he means inner harmony. The serenity of looking at your reflection and knowing you did not betray yourself. Because there is one understanding more important than the world's, your own. To understand yourself, forgive yourself, and support yourself. To be that inner witness who says, "I know who I am, even if they don't understand me." A strong soul is measured by its ability to remain dignified when no one validates it. Because the understanding of others may change, but your coherence should not. And if you remain steady, little by little, the world reorders itself. Some will leave, others will return with a new gaze. And the few who understand you effortlessly, those are the ones worth keeping. Do not lower yourself to be understood, because those who constantly demand explanations do not seek to understand you, they seek to control you. And freedom begins when you recognize this and choose to let go. When you stop begging for attention. When you realize that your worth is not measured by how many ears hear you, but by the purity of the intention that guides you. Silence in the face of misunderstanding is not resignation. It is wisdom. It is realizing that sometimes understanding does not come, because it's not the time, not the person, or not the path. And while it doesn't come, you choose to keep your peace. Because some battles are won not by fighting, but by walking away. And some truths only bloom in silence when you stop trying to impose them. You do not need to lower yourself to explain your light. Those in shadow will not see it, no matter how brightly you shine. And those who are awake won't need words, they will feel you. So keep your height. Do not dim your fire to make others comfortable in their darkness. Do not change your language to fit a mind unwilling to expand. Do not shrink your strength to avoid intimidating those who have yet to learn to admire it. The world does not need your explanations, it needs your coherence. Because coherence inspires more than 1,000 speeches. And the silent dignity of one who refuses to lower themselves carries a power that resonates even in hearts that don't yet know why. Do not lower yourself, not even to be loved. Because love that demands your reduction is not love, it is dependence. And understanding that arrives after humiliation is not understanding, it is guilt. Stay whole. Not out of pride, but out of respect for the truth that lives within you. In the end, those who truly understand you will be the ones who never asked for explanations. They will look at you, see your calm, and know. Because true understanding needs no translation. It vibrates, it's felt, it's recognized. And to reach it, you must first walk through the desert of being misunderstood. Only then, when someone finally sees you without effort, will you realize it was all worth it. If something within you felt peace as you heard these words, don't ignore it. Subscribing is not a favor to this space, it's a commitment to yourself. It means you are ready to stop justifying, to live from your truth without fear of judgment or others' gaze. Do it now, and share this message with those who still feel obligated to explain themselves. Because when one person frees themselves from the weight of explanation, they show others that they too can be free. Sixth Stoic lesson. The opinions of others do not belong to you. There is an invisible weight that millions of people carry every day, the burden of what others think of them. And the most ironic thing is that this burden doesn't even belong to them, yet they carry it as if it were part of their body, like armor made of other people's glances, judgments, and expectations. A soul that lives dependent on the approval of others does not live, it performs. Every word is measured, every gesture calculated, every decision filtered through an imaginary lens of acceptance. And when it finally receives the applause it longed for, it doesn't feel relief, it feels fear, fear of losing it. Marcus Aurelius wrote with stoic coldness, "If another's opinion troubles you, it is because you have given it too much importance." There lies the heart of the problem. It's not the other's judgment that hurts, it's the value you give it. It's not criticism that wounds you, it's your desire for everyone to understand, value, and praise you. And when that desire dominates, you become a slave to other people's wills. Every word spoken about you holds power, but only because you give it that power. The wise understand something the rest forget. The opinions of others are wind. They blow, they make noise, they stir the dust, but they do not change the essence of the rock. And you, if you aspire to freedom, must become that rock. Firm, constant, unshaken by the noise of the world. Human beings fear being judged because they mistake opinion for truth. But an opinion is not a fact, it is a reflection of the inner world of the one who expresses it. When someone criticizes you, they are not describing you, they are revealing their own fears, frustrations and frustras and limitations. The opinions of others are a broken mirror that does not reflect your real form, but the distortion of the one holding it. And if you live believing in those reflections, you end up fragmented. Think of all the times you changed your path because of what someone said, of the decisions you postponed because you feared what people would think, of the words you didn't say, the ideas you didn't defend, the dreams you buried in silence, all of it because of the fear of being judged. But what did you gain? Was it worth trading your authenticity for a fleeting moment of approval? That currency always loses its value. And when you realize it, you've already become a stranger in your own life. Epictetus taught that there are things that depend on you and things that do not. Your behavior depends on you. Your decisions, your judgment, your virtue, they depend on you. But the opinions of others belong to the realm of the uncontrollable. And if you give your peace to what you cannot control, you lose the reins of your soul. Your serenity ends up in the hands of whoever decides to speak next. That's why the Stoic practices indifference toward external judgment. Not because he doesn't care about the world, but because he knows he cannot build his life on foundations he doesn't control. What they praise you for today, they will criticize tomorrow. Those who attack you today will imitate you tomorrow. And you, if you are wise, will not move an inch. because applause and contempt are merely two sides of the same trap. Both depend on others. Freedom begins when you can walk between criticism and praise with the same serenity. When you understand that neither elevates you nor destroys you. When your self-worth doesn't rise with applause or fall with judgment. A free soul doesn't seek to please. It seeks to be just, coherent, virtuous. And that, even if the world doesn't applaud it, always sustains itself. Seneca warned, "He who lives, according to nature, needs no witnesses." That phrase captures the Stoic ideal. To live according to reason, virtue, and the Logos, and to do so without expecting applause. Because if your motivation depends on being seen, your strength will be as fragile as public attention, and the public's mood changes every day. A soul free from the opinions of others becomes light. It stops justifying itself, stops comparing, stops begging for understanding, and in that detachment, something deeper appears. True peace. That peace is not euphoria or pride, it is balance. It is being able to look at criticism without resentment and at praise without arrogance. It is understanding that no external word can define you if your conscience is in order. The opinions of others only hurt when they coincide with an internal doubt. If someone calls you a coward and you know you're not, you smile. But if it hurts, it's because there's a part of you that hasn't yet healed. The wise use criticism as a mirror, not as a chain. They observe it, evaluate it, and if they find truth, they correct themselves. If not, they let it pass. Thus they turn judgment into a tool for growth, not a source of suffering. Imagine for a moment a different scenario. Think of how much energy you'd recover if you stopped trying to control what others think. If every negative word found you so calm it couldn't find a place to land. If you could walk, knowing that the most important respect is the one you give yourself. That is the freedom the Stoic seeks, not indifference born of pride, but of understanding, because he knows he cannot live well while his peace depends on the noise of others. And if you ever wonder how to achieve it, start with this exercise. Before reacting to a criticism or judgment, pause. Ask yourself, does what this person thinks depend on me? The answer will always be no. Then let it go. Do not give power to what you cannot change. Remember, the opinions of others are not your burden, they are their reflection. And you are not here to carry broken mirrors. There is something deeply liberating in walking through life knowing you have nothing to prove. No need to display virtue, defend your story, or justify your choices. Just live with integrity. Because when your actions are righteous, time explains what words cannot. Judgment dissolves. Truth remains. And the soul finally rests. The opinions of others do not belong to you. Not their weight, not their shadow, not their noise. Your task is to keep building your path, to do good without show, to learn from mistakes without shame. The rest are just voices in the wind, and the wind does not stop those who know where they are going. So let them talk, let them assume, let them imagine. None of it changes who you are because opinions fade, but character remains. And while others waste their time judging your life, you will continue quietly building the only masterpiece that truly matters, your soul. 7th Stoic lesson. Being true to yourself is worth more than being approved. Living in search of approval is dying slowly without realizing it. Because every time you do something to please, you surrender a small part of yourself. And when you do it too many times, you no longer know who you are. You only know what others expect you to be. That is the tragedy of those who live to fit in. They gain applause but lose their truth. The soul that seeks approval forgets the serenity of acting out of conviction. And the price is high. It lives tied to others' gaze, anxious not to disappoint, fearful of being judged. That anxiety is the echo of a life disconnected from itself. Seneca said it clearly, "He who pleases everyone displeases everyone," because those who try to please everyone end up losing even their own respect. Being true to yourself does not mean being stubborn or closed-minded. It means not selling your principles for applause. It means being able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and know you acted in alignment with your values, even if no one recognized it. Because there is something more valuable than approval. The peace of knowing you did not betray your conscience. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within, there lies the source of good." The source is not outside in opinions or in crowds. It is within you, where reason dwells, where the Logos whispers what is right, even when the world pushes you in another direction. But to hear it, you need silence. And to maintain it, you need courage. Because being true to yourself in a world that rewards compliance is an act of bravery. Have you noticed how the fear of disappointing others hides behind kindness? You accept commitments you don't want. You silence truths that burn inside. You say yes when your soul screams no. And in doing so, you drift one step further from authenticity. The Stoic, on the other hand, learns to bear the weight of disapproval with serenity, because he knows that being true to himself has a cost, and that cost is solitude. But that solitude is not punishment, it is purification. It is the space where you discover who you are without the noise of the world. There are no applauses there, but there is clarity. No company, but there is direction. And when you can remain in that state without needing to justify yourself, without craving approval, something changes. You no longer seek to belong, because you already belong to yourself. Epictetus taught, "If you want to be free, do not wish for things to happen as you want, but wish for them to happen as they do." Applied to approval, it means accepting that not everyone will understand you. Some will walk away, others will criticize, and some will remain silent. But as long as you act with virtue, none of these reactions will move you, because the wise do not seek to please, they seek to be just. And inner justice begins when you refuse to trade your integrity for acceptance. Those who live for approval die by criticism. Today they applaud you, tomorrow they condemn you, and if your worth depends on that, your spirit becomes a pendulum. You rise with praise, you fall with rejection, until you grow tired of the swing and realize that the only lasting stability comes from within, from the soul that says, "I do what is right because it is right, not because I am being watched." Being true to yourself also means enduring misunderstanding. Sometimes the world will call your self-care selfishness, your calm coldness, your boundaries rejection. But if you know where your actions come from, you will not need to explain them. Time will reveal what words cannot. And when that happens, you will realize something powerful. Silent truth lasts longer than any justification. The Stoic path is not that of the most loved, but of the most upright. And integrity has a light that needs no spotlight. Sometimes it doesn't even show right away. But when others seek refuge in confusion, in drama, or in inconsistency, the person of integrity stands firm. Not because they are superior, but because they have learned not to betray themselves. And that, in a world of masks, is a form of resistance. When you are true to yourself, even your mistakes make sense, because you no longer act from the need to please, but from the desire to learn. And when you fail, you correct without guilt, because you know your mistake was honest. Guilt belongs to those who act against their conscience out of fear of disappointing others. That is the true defeat. Betraying yourself to preserve an image that isn't even yours. You don't need to be understood by everyone, only to be understood by yourself. You don't need approval, you need coherence. You don't need applause, you need serenity. Because when your purpose is solid, the judgments of others become distant noise. And if you ever doubt, remember, no one can give you lasting validation if you don't give it to yourself first. Seneca said that the wise are not swayed by the crowd, not because they despise others, but because they know the crowd changes direction every day, and those who follow it end up lost. The wise walk alone if necessary, but their step is steady. They know it's better to be alone with the truth than surrounded by falsehood. And there is no loneliness harsher than that of someone surrounded by people but disconnected from themselves. Faithfulness to oneself is not a destination, it is a practice. It is cultivated with every small decision you make. When you choose silence over lies, authenticity over approval, calm over impulse, each coherent act is a brick in the temple of your soul. And that temple does not need to be admired, only inhabited. The world will constantly push you to choose between your truth and acceptance, and in each choice your freedom is measured. Because being true to yourself is not a luxury, it is the only way to live without fear. And those who live without fear become impossible to manipulate. There is no greater power than that. So the next time you feel the temptation to explain yourself, to soften yourself, to pretend in order to be liked, pause. Remember what you lose every time you betray your essence. Remember that approval is temporary, but inner fidelity leaves a mark. And if you ever find yourself alone for having been true to yourself, be grateful. That is the fairest price for the deepest peace. Because the day you stop seeking approval, you will discover that you were already enough. And that discovery, silent and powerful, is worth more than all the applause in the world. 8th Stoic lesson. Calm is the best response to misunderstanding. There is something deeply human in the desire to be understood. We want others to see our intentions, to grasp why we act as we do, to recognize the goodness behind our decisions. But the world is not always willing to understand. And when misunderstanding arrives, it hurts. It hurts because it casts doubt on our truth, because it confronts us with the loneliness of not being seen. Yet the Stoic knows there is no higher wisdom than remaining calm when others fail to understand you. Misunderstanding is not an offense, it is a natural consequence of difference. Not everyone has walked your path, seen what you've seen, or felt what you've felt. Each mind interprets the world according to its own story, fears, and level of awareness. To expect everyone to understand you is like demanding that everyone see the sunrise from the same mountain. Some are still in the night. And if you react with anger to that, you descend into darkness yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When someone wrongs you, ask yourself what they think is good or bad. If you understand this, you will feel compassion, not anger." That is the root of calm understanding, that the other person does not know what you know. They do not act against you, they act from their ignorance, their wounds, or their ego. And your serenity is not weakness, it is mastery. Because the wise do not seek to win arguments, they seek not to lose their peace. Think of all the times you were disturbed by being misunderstood. When you were judged without context, or accused without reason. Your instinct was to defend, explain, clarify, even shout if necessary. But in doing so, you lost something more precious than your reputation, your serenity. Defending the ego always has a price, and that price is calm. And without calm, everything else becomes noise. Seneca expressed it with cutting clarity. The best response to an insult is indifference, because an insult seeks reaction, and when it finds none, it dies. Misunderstanding works the same way. It feeds on your response. If you give it energy, it grows. If you observe it in silence, it dissolves. Calm is the invisible wall that disarms any attack, not because it ignores the wound, but because it transcends it. Serenity in the face of misunderstanding is a form of compassion, not toward others, but toward yourself. It is choosing not to exhaust yourself in battles that lead nowhere. It is protecting your mind from useless energy drain, and in its purest essence, it is also an affirmation of freedom. Because when you can remain calm amid others' confusion, you prove that your balance no longer depends on external understanding. Epictetus taught firmly, "It's not what happens that disturbs you, but what you believe about what happens." When someone fails to understand you, what truly hurts is not the misunderstanding itself, but your belief that you need to be understood. That belief is the chain. When you break it, you discover that you don't need to convince, justify, or translate yourself. You only need to act with virtue and let time reveal the truth. Calm is not passivity, it is strategy. Because the one who reacts impulsively loses control, and the one who stays serene commands the situation. Not by manipulating it, but by choosing when to speak, how to act, and when to withdraw. Calm gives you perspective, and perspective reveals that almost nothing that seems personal actually is. Most of the judgments you receive say little about you. They reveal much about the one judging. There is a quiet strength in not defending yourself. The one who attacks expects a reaction. When none comes, they are left facing themselves. Your serenity forces them to listen to their own emptiness. And though they may never admit it, on some level they understand they cannot control one who does not react. That is the true victory of the serene soul. Misunderstanding is also a teacher. It teaches you to stand firm when no one else stands with you, to trust your path even when the world doubts it. It pushes you back to yourself to examine your motives, to purify your intentions. If your heart is clean, no misunderstanding can stain it, and if it isn't, criticism becomes your most useful mirror. Thus, even injustice can become guidance. When the soul reaches a certain maturity, it learns to distinguish what must be corrected from what must be released. Correct yourself if there is truth in the criticism, but if there isn't, let it go without resentment. You don't need the last word. Wise silence carries more weight than 1,000 explanations, because time, that incorruptible judge, always puts everything in its place. Think of a lake. When someone throws a stone, the water ripples, but if you don't interfere, it returns to stillness by itself. Your mind works the same way. Each judgment, each misunderstanding, each hurtful word is a stone. If you rush to remove it, you only stir up more mud. If you wait, the water clears on its own. That is calm. That is mastery. Seneca said the wise should be like a doctor who listens to the patient without catching the disease. Misunderstanding is a collective fever, and only those who remain serene can heal themselves without falling into contagion. So when you are not understood, don't react. Breathe. Remember who you are. Remember that your purpose does not depend on everyone else understanding it. A strong soul knows when to speak and when to stay silent. And when it stays silent, it is not out of fear, but out of respect for its own peace. Because some truths can only be heard once the noise ends. And if you are the first to fall silent, you help the world to listen. Calm does not seek to be right. It seeks to preserve virtue. It does not seek to win. It seeks not to lose clarity. It does not seek to impose. It seeks to inspire. And in that balance, misunderstanding ceases to be a threat and becomes an opportunity to practice the hardest art of all, staying at peace while the world burns. So when you feel misunderstood, don't rush to explain, convince, or prove yourself. Observe. Remember that the one who shouts the loudest is not always right. And the one who stays silent in peace sometimes says more than 1,000 words. Because a tranquil soul teaches without speaking, and its example is worth more than any argument. Do not fear misunderstanding. Embrace it. Because every time someone fails to understand you, the universe gives you a chance to reaffirm yourself, to see whether your path is truly yours or depends on the eyes watching it. And if you can keep walking calmly, even when no one applauds, even when everyone doubts, then you have already won. Calm is not the absence of emotion. It is emotion governed by reason. It is the fire that doesn't go out, but burns under control. And once you learn to keep it that way, no external word can touch you. Because what is solid within you no longer needs defense. 9th Stoic lesson. You don't need to convince anyone to have worth. We spend much of our lives trying to prove that we matter. To our parents, our friends, society, and to those who once doubted us. And without realizing it, we turn existence into an endless courtroom where every action is evidence and every gaze a judgment. But there is a truth as harsh as it is liberating. Your worth doesn't increase when people understand you, nor does it decrease when they ignore you. Your value is not up for negotiation. It is simply recognized. And if you don't recognize it first, no one else will. Human beings have a deep hunger for validation. We seek applause, approval, and recognition because we've forgotten our inner witness. But the Stoic understands that the most important judgment does not come from outside, it comes from within. Epictetus put it bluntly, "He who wishes to be admired has already surrendered." Because the moment you feel the need to convince, you have surrendered your power over your worth. And whoever hands their worth over to another's opinion becomes an invisible slave. How many times have you wanted to explain your decisions, your dreams, your path only to be misunderstood? How many times have you disguised your authenticity so you'd be taken seriously? And still, it wasn't enough. Because those who don't want to understand you never will, no matter how many arguments you give them. And those who do understand you don't need them. That's why the wise stay silent when the foolish argue, not out of pride, but because they know that convincing isn't the same as teaching. Seneca wrote, "Virtue needs no defenders, only practitioners." And he was right. You don't need to justify what is right. What is right explains itself with time, with actions, with the serenity that coherence leaves behind. Every time you feel the impulse to convince, remember this: noise proves nothing but desperation. A soul at peace with its path has no urgency to be understood. The desire to convince comes from fear, fear of rejection, fear of being ignored, fear of not being enough. But all that fear is illusion. No one can reject who you truly are. They can only reject the image they have of you, and that image is not you. You are the stillness behind the word, the motive behind the act, the essence behind the persona. When you remember that, fear dissolves and silence becomes your ally. The need to convince also reveals attachment. Attachment to approval, to prestige, to recognition. Stoicism teaches how to release that attachment with grace. Because recognition is a shadow, a consequence, not a goal. The one who does good expecting gratitude acts not from virtue, but from interest. And the one who defends their truth hoping to be believed still doesn't fully trust it. True conviction seeks no witnesses. Think about the people you most admire. They're probably not the loudest or the most visible. They're the firm ones. The ones who don't explain, don't argue, simply live in alignment with what they believe. Their worth isn't in convincing you, it's in inspiring you. And that only happens when there's coherence between thought, word, and deed. Coherence doesn't shout, it shines. And its light, sooner or later, reaches everyone. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, lived among those who betrayed, slandered, and criticized him. Yet he never sought to defend himself against every rumor. He knew that time and serenity are fairer judges than words. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to become like your enemy." And we could add, "The best way to convince is not to try." Because nothing persuades more than the calm of someone who needs to prove nothing. Those who live to convince are at war with the world. Every disagreement feels like a threat, every criticism a wound. But those who live in coherence are at peace with themselves. They can hear criticism without breaking, because they know truth doesn't depend on volume. They can accept disagreement without anger, because they know understanding is not an obligation, it's a privilege. And they can move forward without resentment, because they know their purpose needs no witnesses. Sometimes silence is the most powerful argument, because it leaves others alone with their prejudices. And prejudice, without opposition, collapses on its own. You don't need to shout your worth, live it. You don't need to explain it, embody it. Character always outweighs rhetoric. Being misunderstood is not punishment, it's a natural consequence of being authentic. If everyone understands you, you're probably not being yourself. Authenticity divides, because most people prefer the comfort of conformity to the truth of difference. That's why those who leave a mark are not the ones who convince, but the ones who remain true to themselves even when no one applauds. Convincing drains you. Serenity nourishes you. And eventually, you learn to choose your battles. You stop trying to change others' minds and focus on keeping your own mind at peace. The wise do not seek to be right. They seek harmony with the nature of things. And that includes accepting that some will never see what you see. If your intention is just, you don't need to defend it. If your purpose is noble, it needs no approval. And if your soul is upright, it needs no witnesses. Truth stands on its own, and falsehood collapses even if shouted by 1,000 voices. So don't fear failing to convince. Fear only acting against your conscience. The deepest freedom begins when you no longer need others to believe in you. When you can keep moving forward without being understood, without seeking validation, without fearing judgment. At that point, your life stops being an explanation and becomes a silent affirmation, a declaration of integrity visible in your walk, your gaze, your peace. Remember this, people change opinions, judgments fade, labels wear out. But your serenity, if you nurture it, endures. And one day, those who didn't understand you will cross paths with you and finally see everything clearly, without a word. They'll see your calm, your coherence, your constancy, and recognize, even in silence, that time proved you right. But by then, you won't care. Because once you stop trying to convince, you no longer need to win. And when you no longer need to win, you can finally live without the weight of expectations, without the noise of other voices, without the urgency to explain who you are. Simply being. And that, in its simplicity, is the greatest triumph of all. So stop trying to convince. Do what's right, even if no one applauds. Walk in silence, even if no one understands. Because every step taken in faithfulness to yourself is worth more than 1,000 speeches made to be accepted. And when you achieve that, you'll realize something that changes everything. There is no argument more powerful than the serenity of one who no longer needs to prove anything. 10th Stoic lesson. Freedom begins when you stop justifying your existence. There comes a point in life when you get tired. Tired of explaining why you chose your path, why you changed, why you're no longer interested in what once mattered. Tired of justifying your silences, your boundaries, your decisions. And that exhaustion is not weakness, it's a sign of evolution. Because when you no longer feel the need to justify yourself, it means you finally understood the essential truth. You are not here to be understood. You are here to live in coherence. The world trains you to be accountable for everything. Since childhood, you learn to explain why you cry, why you're quiet, why you don't fit in. You learn to ask permission to be yourself. And in the process, you become an expert at apologizing for your existence, for being different, for thinking differently, for choosing another rhythm. But one day, if you're lucky and brave, you wake up and say enough. Enough apologizing for who I am. Enough trying to convince the world that my way is also valid. That day, true freedom begins. Freedom doesn't arrive when you do whatever you want. It begins when you no longer feel the obligation to explain it. When you act from your center without fear of being misunderstood, without urgency to justify yourself. When you understand that silence can be a powerful declaration. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The soul becomes invincible when it is content to be what it is." And that is precisely what we are, souls, seeking reconciliation with their own form, without adornments, without excuses, without speeches. You don't need to justify your existence to anyone, because your existence is justification enough. You are here, and that is enough. You are part of the order of the universe, a spark of logos, a fragment of reason and matter that breathes, feels, and thinks. Your very being fulfills a function in the whole, even if the world doesn't see it. Trying to explain that to someone who sees only the surface is like trying to describe the ocean with a single drop. Impossible. Epictetus said, "Do not seek to make things happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do." That includes how others see you, how they judge you, how they understand you. When you stop forcing others to comprehend you, you recover the energy you once spent maintaining an image, and that energy returns to you transformed into peace. Because you no longer need to prove you deserve to be here. You already know. The one who lives justifying themselves lives on the defensive. And the one who lives on the defensive doesn't live, they merely survive. They are trapped in an invisible war against the judgment of others. Every gesture, every word, every decision becomes a battlefield between authenticity and fear. Until one day they understand that no one can give permission to exist, that the validation they seek cannot be found outside, but within. In the moment, they calmly say, "I don't need to explain my path to those who don't walk beside me." Constant justification is a subtle form of emotional slavery. The free soul, in contrast, acts with coherence and remains silent, not because it despises others, but because it understands that the worth of a life is not measured in arguments but in actions. Seneca said it with the precision of one who had already grasped it. A good life needs no defense, it is its own praise. The wise do not discuss their virtue, they demonstrate it by living. The need to justify yourself comes from fear. Fear of losing love, respect, or belonging. But what you lose by being true to yourself was never really yours. And what remains after silence, that is what truly belongs to you. When you choose to stop explaining who you are, the world reacts. Some people leave, others judge, a few stay. And those few, the ones who remain without demanding masks, are worth more than the entire crowd that only loved you while you pretended. To stop justifying your existence is not arrogance, it is maturity. It is understanding that you don't have to be understood to be right. It is knowing that rejection is not punishment, but direction. Every time someone fails to understand you, the universe is pointing you back to yourself. Because the soul that justifies itself dissolves, and the one that stands firm, even trembling, grows stronger. Think of how many times you softened your truth to avoid discomfort. How many times you stayed silent to avoid conflict, smiled so you wouldn't seem cold. agreed so you wouldn't seem difficult. And each time, something inside you shrank, something slowly dimmed. That is the price of living to please. It is paid with authenticity. But there also comes the time to pay the opposite debt, the debt of being yourself, even if no one applauds. Authentic freedom is silent. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't say, "Look at me." It says, "Here I am." And that "here I am" neither asks permission nor offers apologies. It simply stands. It simply breathes. It simply lives. The free soul doesn't need to explain its direction, because it knows that those who must understand it will not do so with reason, but through their own evolution. And that evolution cannot be forced, it must be awaited. When you reach that freedom, everything changes: your relationships, your way of speaking, even your breathing. You stop running to prove yourself and start walking to enjoy yourself. You stop filling silences with explanations and fill them with presence. You stop apologizing for your limits and defend them with calm. You no longer feel the urgency to be understood, because you understand that misunderstanding is part of the price of authenticity. The wise seek neither approval nor permission. They seek only to act with virtue. And when they do, even if no one sees, even if no one applauds, even if everyone judges, they remain at peace. That peace is their shield and their testament. The freedom of not justifying yourself doesn't isolate you. It centers you. It turns you into a silent beacon in the noise of the world. And those who seek clarity will eventually find you, because nothing draws more than the serenity of one who needs no persuasion. Nothing strikes deeper than the dignity of one who stands firm in their truth. And nothing inspires more than the example of one who simply lives without apologizing for existing. So stop explaining, stop translating yourself, stop asking for permission. Your existence requires no defense, only presence. Live in such a way that your actions speak for you. Let your calm be your declaration. Let your coherence be your argument. And let your silence be the most powerful answer to a world that screams without listening. Because the day you understand that you don't need to justify your existence, that day, you will stop living for others and begin, at last, to live for yourself. When you no longer need to explain, life falls into place. There are nights when the mind won't turn off. It replays past conversations, rehearses responses you never gave, writes explanations no one asked for. The soul seeks justice through understanding, as if being understood could bring relief, but it doesn't. Because what truly hurts is not that others don't understand you, but that you still believe they must. And when you finally realize that, something within you changes forever. You stop composing mental speeches. You stop justifying your wounds. You stop talking to ghosts. And at last, you begin to listen to the silence you once avoided. That silence where there is no audience, no judges, no applause. Only you. Only your voice bare, without argument, without defense. And then you see it clearly. You don't need to explain who you are, because who you are is already complete, even when no one understands. The mature soul needs no witnesses. It has learned that its purpose doesn't depend on approval, but on coherence. And that coherence isn't built through words, but through silent actions repeated day after day, even when no one celebrates them. The mature soul doesn't react to others' judgment, because it no longer lives on borrowed validation. It no longer feeds on fleeting recognition, but on a deep peace that doesn't need applause. There is something almost sacred in the decision to stop explaining. It isn't indifference, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that you no longer need to convince to exist, nor justify to be accepted. That those who want to understand you will, in time, and those who can't will continue speaking the language of the ego. And you, instead of entering the noise, choose to withdraw into the space of calm. because you understand that a mind that constantly defends itself never rests, and that only those who stop fighting against misunderstanding can find true serenity. To stop explaining isn't to withdraw from the world, it's to reconcile with it. It's accepting that others have the right to their perception, and you have the right to your peace. It's understanding that not everyone will see the truth that guides you, and that it's not your task to open their eyes, but to keep yours clear. It's living without the burden of constant correction, without the need to persuade, and paradoxically, that makes you more convincing. Because nothing inspires more trust than someone who no longer needs to be right. Every time you choose not to defend yourself, you reaffirm your freedom. Every time you choose not to explain, you expand your soul. And every time you choose silence over argument, you show that you're no longer at war with the world, but at peace with yourself. The wise know that truth has its own rhythm. It doesn't need to be proclaimed to be real. It doesn't need to be accepted to exist. Truth is patient, and time is its best ally. So trust. Let your days speak for you. Let your decisions reveal what your words no longer wish to explain. And you'll see how life, with less noise, begins to align itself on its own. Perhaps those who once misunderstood you will see you again one day and finally understand. But by then, you won't need them to. Because true redemption doesn't come when others understand you, but when you no longer need them to. That's the difference between a free soul and a dependent one. The first acts with serenity, the second with need. When you learn to live without justifying yourself, something extraordinary happens. Your energy returns. All the energy you used to spend explaining, convincing, seeking approval comes back to you. And with it comes clarity, focus, strength. You stop looking outward and start looking inward. And there, in that intimate space where only you exist, you rediscover what you had lost, the feeling that your life belongs to you. Freedom, then, isn't a shout, it's a sigh. A calm breath after years of tension. It's the moment you realize that everything is fine, even if no one says so. It's accepting that not all paths can be explained, and that truth doesn't always need witnesses. And that, deep down, only a serene soul can walk lightly through a world that demands noise. Seneca wrote, "He who is at peace with himself lives in peace with the universe," and that is the goal. Not to convince, not to be understood, not to be right, but to live in peace. To live without urgency, without drama, without weight. To live knowing that each step taken in faithfulness to your truth is justification enough for your existence. To live knowing that you no longer have to defend yourself because you are no longer under attack. To live simply with the calm of someone who no longer needs to prove they are living well. So today, release the need to explain. Not because you can't, but because you no longer need to. Let your silences say what your words no longer wish to express. Let your presence be enough, and allow the universe to show, in its own way and in its own time, what you've always known. That peace arrives when you finally stop justifying your existence and begin, without guilt, to live. Because when you stop giving explanations, everything changes. And what changes is not the world, it's you. You, at last, free. You, at last, whole. You, at last, silent but more eloquent than ever. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds, a community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.